I have a new book. It's called Kill Brother, Kill Sister. It's set in Anchorage, of course, historically between 1976 and 1986 or 87. Why don't I know? Because I don't know. There were so many trials coming out of these two cases. And it's essentially this sort of bookend story about a woman named Muriel Pfeil who was killed in a car bombing 1976. And at that time, sad to say, the Anchorage police were not at the top of their game. So her murder is still unsolved. This is the same period, of course, where the Robert Hansen case was ongoing. That wasn't resolved until actually 1983, 1984. So, hence that. The second part of it, the kill brother part, is Muriel Pfeil's oldest brother, only brother, Robert Pfeil. He was killed in a drive-by shooting in 1985. Lived a month, survived a month, and succumbed to his injury. So this is not just, of course, about family, because there's a third party here, actually two third parties. This is a series of love triangles turned into hate triangles. So one of the triangles, of course, is between Muriel and her brother and Muriel's then husband, a guy named Neil Mackay. The second triangle, if you will, develops between Muriel Pfeil's brother, Robert, and Neil Mackay, and the son of Muriel and Neil. And of course, there's other family dramas in here. Uh, it it was a book. It was hard to write because there's so much emotion, there's so much damage in this book, and yet I felt like it needed to be told, this story. In great part because there were a lot of, what shall I say, unforced errors, preventable kinds of errors that, had they been resolved in a timely fashion, well, who knows, right? Life is not one of those things. Anyway, the new book, Kill Brother, Kill Sister, available now from Epicenter Press. It's, I think, one of my best works. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you. And now we'll go on to part two. Yeah, because there's more up this way. This is just like me. I leave something important out. So, a postscript. One of the key factors in Kill Brother, Kill Sister is the amount of money that's evident. Neil Mackay is a multimillionaire. Robert Pfeil is a multimillionaire. Muriel Pfeil is on their way to being a millionaire. So the factor of money cannot be neglected in sort of all the mischief that people get into here. Don't want to make too much of the money, but let's just give an example. At one point, Neil Mackay is tired of waiting for custody of his son, whom he claims after his wife is murdered. Oh, how convenient. And takes him to Hawaii. And the Anchorage police and the state of Alaska chase him. Okay, fair enough. And he puts his kid on a plane under assumed name with an official from Micronesia, and he takes him to the South Pacific on his own with this guy. And there's a big chase scene in the middle of this book because money. Because money. 145,000. This is in like 80s dollars to get him back. We're talking probably a $500,000 spent on detectives and airfare and all that nonsense. So don't forget that part. Millionaires and how they spend their money. Not always responsibly. Okay, now let's go to now it's going to be part three. I apologize, but let's, That's how I write. Part one, part two, part three. Thank you. Enjoy the book. Crime is one of those kind of controversial genres. I get it because it's sort of the chaos of extreme violence. And my job, our job as crime writers, is to help people understand that. And it's a challenge, okay? But when we think about this genre, we think about it's people at their most evil. And that's the part we need to kind of explicate. Like, what's going on here? What makes this person or these people do this? Because there's so much damage left in their wake. We also want to see, though, people at their best. And usually for that, we need a guide. And Butcher Baker, that person was, of course, Sergeant Glenn Flothi of Alaska State Troopers. He understood this guy perhaps better than anyone else. That helps. Otherwise, we're kind of building this story surrounding our criminal or criminals with other stories that sort of illuminate it and build it in. And that's what we do. So now in the new book, Kill Brother, Kill Sister, I was, of course, looking for a similar guide, someone who could hold a torch up and help illuminate the dark corners. Right? Okay, and it turns out that person was not a cop, was not a judge, was actually someone who himself became a victim. And I'm talking about Robert Pfeil. He holds up the torch in this case. It's more than a flashlight, it's brighter than a flashlight. It's brighter than a candle, of course. It's not even a little candle, a birthday candle, it's bright. And in this next part of my discussion, we're going to meet this guy, Alaska pioneer, guy who, well, let's just start. Robert Pfeil. Let's meet him. Robert Pfeil was born in 1930 in Anchorage when Alaska was still a territory. His father, Emil, shown here on a hunting expedition, immigrated from Germany and, after trying his hand at coal mining, started working for the Alaska Railroad. As Anchorage grew, he ventured into the land and building business. In the next shot, we see the rest of Robert Pfeil's family, his mother, father, and two sisters, Muriel and Caroline. His mother, also named Muriel, was the daughter of Scandinavian immigrants. She came to Alaska as a teacher, eventually rising to school principal. So, hardworking people who valued education. Perfect attendance? Yeah. Fifth grade, fourth grade. Bobby was there. Then he changed his name to Robert. As he grew up, Robert Pfeil emerged as a star athlete. In high school, he excelled in baseball and basketball. He was tall. But he was more than that. He was a member of the Torch Society, which based its eligibility on scholarship and good citizenship. By the time he graduated from high school, Robert Pfeil found himself recommended for the military academy at West Point. Bob spent all 4 years at West Point, and when he graduated, he returned to Alaska, stationed at Fort Richardson. His vast knowledge of Alaska was a big plus. He'd fished and hunted these lands as a youth, largely with his father. While stationed at Fort Richardson, he served as an aide-de-camp to his superior officer. But Bob had other plans beyond the military. He applied to and was accepted at the University of Washington School of Medicine. He had his eyes on becoming a medical doctor. On September 30th, 1954, however, tragedy struck. His father was killed in a freak airplane crash. Bob had to change direction and became a pilot for Alaska Airlines. In fact, he became a senior pilot, the top of the line. He also took over the management of the family business: real estate, a department store, apartments, commercial buildings. Soon, however, Robert Pfeil's financial interests took another turn. His family invested in a historic Anchorage building. It was called the Mackay Building, owned by Neil Mackay. That's the low-set structure on the left. That's the addition. That's the new part that the Pfeils helped finance. The Pfeil family were now in business with Neil Mackay, who simultaneously became their family attorney. Neil Mackay came of age in Yarmo, California, a Union Pacific Railroad town stuck in the Mojave Desert. It was a desolate place, and if there was one thing about this man, it was that he always wanted more. He'd served in the U.S. Marines during World War II, but not as a pilot he claimed to be. He wanted more than this desert, more than the place where he grew up. He moved to Alaska to stake his claim. Another part of the more that Neil Mackay wanted was Muriel Pfeil, Bob's sister. A social butterfly, she'd traveled all over Europe with her sister, an army nurse. She'd also studied on scholarship at the University of Erlangen in Nuremberg, Germany. She briefly joined Radio Free Europe, which broadcast to East Germany. Part of her allure, apart from her beauty, was that she owned her own business, Alaska's top travel agency. It was housed, in fact, in a building owned by Neil Mackay. He was her landlord. Muriel's business was a magnet. With the Prudhoe Bay oil discoveries, Alaska was enjoying an economic boom. Vast sums of that travel money was finding its way to Muriel Pfeil's professional travel service. Pretty soon, too soon, some would say, these two were married. After, that is, he finally granted his first wife a divorce. Even so, it seemed a bit reckless. The two of them didn't even have a plan. So the nuptials were hastily made on New Year's Eve in 1969. Muriel belatedly called her older sister to share the news. Robert Pfeil soon spotted something else, something about that perfect marriage. There were frequent fights, not just verbal ones either, between Muriel and Neil Mackay. She spent many nights at Bob's house, camping with his wife and children. That was not a good omen. Bob counseled Muriel to leave the man, to divorce him. But all that changed in mid-1972 when, a little over 3 years into her marriage, Muriel suddenly found herself pregnant. She was 37 years old. Neil was 49. Her son, Neil Pfeil Mackay, soon to be nicknamed Scotty after his father's Scots heritage, was born in early 1973. She hung on for as long as she could, but soon Muriel Pfeil was filing for the divorce that her brother had long advised. At the time, it was one of the longest and most expensive divorces in Alaska history. There were warning signs as well. In court, during the divorce proceedings, there was a physical confrontation between Neil and Muriel. The judge ordered them both to undergo psychiatric evaluations. And then, seemingly out of the blue, Muriel Pfeil was killed by a car bomb. She died instantly. Robert Pfeil found himself in a fight-to-the-end crusade. His very first action was decisive. Get Scotty. Keep him away from Neil Mackay. That was not the end. He found himself in the courts, in deposition rooms, then driving across Anchorage to visit his nephew. His heroic journey had just begun.